So I just got back from seeing Alien Romulus, and I thought I'd just go ahead and give like a really quick synapse review, talk about some of the things that I loved, a few things I didn't think were so cool, and a few things I think that the fan community is gonna be having as water cooler topics for the next couple weeks. So first and foremost, I really enjoyed the movie. I'm coming from the fact that I'm a longtime Alien fan. Alien was one of the first R-rated movies I remember seeing. Very fond memories of my mother speaking very fondly of Sigourney Weaver's place as a strong female role in that movie, and how utterly terrifying it was, and how that still holds up today. And I think this movie does a good job of getting back to the foundations of that. So that'd be the first thing I say I really liked. Fede Alvarez understood the assignment. This needs to be essentially a Eldritch style space horror. There needs to be a consistent feeling of anxiety and dread running through the film, which it does. I thought the pacing was really well in terms of how the acts are set up. That's the overall impression. The first item I'd say that I think the film absolutely hit out of the park was the sound. Holy fuck. Probably one of the best sounding films I have seen in a long time. I went and saw it in a Dolby theater down here in Kennesaw. Saw it as a matinee. There was actually a good bit of people in there, and thankfully everybody was super respectful. But the sound in this film is amazing, and it really does hone in of how important sound plays into horror. Sometimes it's just the absence of sound, and the sense of dread that just hangs in the air. There's also, and this is something I thought the film did really well, which reminded me of the first film, there's this almost what I would call like metronome of dread. So like in the first film, you had the infamous scene with like Mother's self-destruct going, and this film harkens to that. Like there's a lot of mechanical things going, like blaring sirens, the sound of the ship, sounds that in of themselves aren't necessarily terrifying, but given the context of what's going on, you're hearing all these sounds you can't hear if something's sneaking up on you. So big plus to the sound in this film. It was absolutely fantastic. I really liked how it was a smaller cast, and the people they had casted in the roles I thought really did a good job. I forget his first name, it's something Johnson, but he plays an android named Andy in the film, and that guy just friggin' carried the film. Like, he was probably my favorite character. The guy's range was fantastic. Without spoiling his character development, he took it from the start and took it all the way to the finish. So big props to him. I also liked how, with the cast being smaller, you actually felt like you were invested in the characters, much like the first Alien film, and to some degree like Aliens as well. When someone, dies, gets hurt, or is in trouble, you feel a little bit more on the edge of your seat because you've had time with them. They aren't just cannon fodder as if you've got like a huge cast of people. Like in Alien 3, it's a giant prison, and bald white guy number 5 dies. You're like, I don't even know who he is. So, and I think that's a good segue point to, maybe this ties together, but I like the deaths. Like, I like the way that they did the deaths. They felt impactful. There seemed to be some fun creativity as well with where the crew was taking stuff. There were certain characters that I'm thinking, okay, he's definitely going to go, and then they went out in a way that I didn't quite expect, which was nice. And the deaths actually mean something too, and not just because they're smaller characters, but like the way the story is moving along and being set up, they don't just die for no reason, for lack of a better way of putting it. I also really enjoyed how the film, and this might be a bit divisive, I enjoyed how the film built upon the established mythology that had been set up in Prometheus and Covenant. For a lot of Aliens fans, they just won't acknowledge those films, which I think is kind of silly, because when you watch the films, they can stand alone, and they honestly don't do anything to the original Alien films. So to disown them is a bit stereotypical angry nerd, for lack of a better way of putting it. So credit to Fox and them for actually expanding on the mythology of those two films, and I won't give away spoilers of how they do it. It didn't feel canned, it felt organic, it felt like it was a pretty good blending of Prometheus and Covenant moving in from where the story was picking up after Alien, which, on that note, this film takes place 20 years after the first Alien film. So I thought that was really nice. And with that, without giving spoilers, Fetty and the rest of the writing actually, again, went back to having fun. They expanded on it in ways that I didn't really expect them to, which was really cool. It added a unexpected level of horror outside of just seeing the alien, which was in of itself enough. So moving to that, the alien. Huge win on them going forward with the practical effects. I think Fede Alvarez had an interview where he was very right. He's like, you can actually be scary of it because it's actually something there in front of you. It's not some guy in a green screen suit. It's not just CG where you're quite literally having to pretend that there's something there. The practical effects look great, especially with what they did with the face huggers. They actually had animatronic face huggers like running across the floor, which was very unsettling. But as it should be, like it sold the message very well. I thought the practical effects were done in a way where there was a good use of showing the alien to the scale that they needed to. And then again, much like the first film, where we're going to pull back and you're going to see what you need to see, like a bit of the tail or maybe a little bit of the head, and that's all. So the next thing that jumped out to me, the last thing I say that was a big plus, was the production design. Again, they absolutely understood what they were supposed to do. They carried over, again, with the film takes place 20 years after the first film. So it's effectively I guess you could say, the same era in the chronology of all the films. But they kept that future imperfect, analog, futurist feel on stuff. Like, there's still CRT TV screens, there's still like these mega computers that drive giant star freighters that have giant chunky keyboards. The film opens up on a mining world, and it feels, rightfully so, like grungy and dirty, even as you're seeing these starships taking off. So absolutely knocked it out of the park with, not to call it cyberpunk, but there is that element of like high-tech, low-life feel all throughout the film. Even when you're getting into like some of the like more pristine, clean, white, sciencey areas, it still has that feel like it was directly pulled from the first Alien film or the Alien Isolation game, if you ever played that. So again, that was probably one of my favorite parts, was that mix of like the actors are doing such a good job and the film's good, and you're actually being distracted by like, oh wow, that wall looks cool, or like the shit on the ceiling, like wow, that looks really interesting. So that speaks credit to the fact that I'm getting distracted by the way that chairs are looking in a microscope, because the production design team did such a phenomenal job in that. So talking about some of the stuff that I wasn't too keen on, and this actually ties to, in some ways, the production design that I mentioned and the practical effects used on the aliens. So this is a big spoiler alert, so turn away at this point if you don't want any spoilers. Okay, now, so in the film, about one-third of the way through, the cast comes face to face with a synthetic that's the same model as Ash, which was, of course, the infamous android that went berserk in the first film. It isn't Ash, it's the same model as him, and his name is Rook, and wouldn't you know it, he's also a science officer on this station. Well, Ian Holm, the actor who played Ash and subsequently would be playing Rook, died many years ago. So they superimposed, they used, I don't know, like AI computer, I can't even tell nowadays, and basically used Ian Holm's face on this android. which didn't really work really well for me, because the first thing I'm thinking of, like, okay, I understand why they did it. They're trying to do some kind of Easter egg callback to the first film, but they didn't have to do it. Like, it wasn't like it was necessary for this android model to be the one that was the MacGuffin for a plot line going on. It's like, why not just hire a different actor? Like, it would have affected, like, there was nothing about using Ian Holmes' model of android that moved the film forward in like a necessary way. And that's what I was thinking, like, okay, there has to be a reason they're using Ash's android model to move this forward. And there wasn't. He acts like an android, like he acts at the directives of Weyland Yutani. And I'm like, okay, that was a completely unnecessary use of his face, other than just for a fan service Easter egg, which is fine. But the problem is, in a film where everything feels so grounded and analog and grungy, and you've got practical effects, and it's like the use of putting like a CGI'd resurrected actor's face on there, and he's in a lot. It's not like it's a scene and they go. Like, he goes all throughout the film, all throughout. Like, he has multiple scenes with multiple like lines of dialogue. It really just took away from it, because it was like, again, with all these practical effects and the production design, it made it that much more apparent how fake it was. So it was really jarring for me, and it was like, okay, I didn't like it. Like, there wasn't a point where it got better, because again, that was the last holdout for me. It's like, okay, maybe there is some, again, call back to the original Alien film of why this particular model is the one who's doing this, and there isn't. That's it. Apparently this model of android are just assholes. That's that's the only common denominator. So that was probably one of my biggest gripes, was using Ian Holmes' face. And there's literally a credit, like, I watched through the credits. At the very end, they give like a special acknowledgement, like, you know, big thanks to the estate of Ian Holm, which is fine, but it was just kind of one of those, like, I really don't understand the creative decision behind it, and I think it took away from the aesthetic of the film in a big way, actually. Some other things that I wasn't really too keen on, and I don't, this may have just been my theater, so as much as I was talking about the sound, which it was good, there were certain lines of dialogue that certain characters are saying, in British, if you will, because again, carrying over the tradition that it's an alien film, there's going to be someone from future England, you know, future like Southampton in space. They always find their way in space, people from Birmingham or what have you. I couldn't understand some of the line of dialogue that was going on. And it only seemed to happen like in the beginning part of the film. And again, this could literally just be me. But I did have to kind of one of those things where I'm kind of like leaning forward a bit, like, okay, what the fuck are they talking about? Like, oh, okay, we're good. All right. So that was like a minor gripe, because again, as the film went on, maybe I just got used to it. It went away. What were some of the other things? Again, I really haven't had a lot of time to dwell on this. A lot of this has been me like driving home from the theater thinking about this. I'm always really kind of kitschy when films, like they're a film in a series of films, right? And there's sometimes like callbacks to like the score. They did that a couple times. It felt a bit too expositional. Like, again, I won't spoil it, but there is a scene that is a huge callback to like Prometheus. I mean, it's one of those things where, again, this is credit to Fede Alvarez. Like, he is, at this point, he has such an intelligently, confidently made film. It's not insulting the audience's intelligence. It's acknowledging like that I've got fans watching that know I know these movies like at the back of their hand. And there's a particular scene where they go to a lab, and I feel like Alvarez falls into the trap tropes of like, see, like, yeah, you remember that? Like, you see this? Like, and it's callbacks to Prometheus, and they start like using the music in a way that it just felt like, okay, that's just, I don't know if corny is the right word, but it was like the scene itself, like what's happening plot wise, is fine. Like I didn't have a problem with that. It was just some of the expositional stuff, like another spoiler. So they're effectively talking about like the black goo from Prometheus. They're working it into the story in a really good way, I thought. Again, I like the context of the scene. You understand, if you're watching the scene and you're not a fan, you don't need to know that it calls back to these films. But if you're already a fan, you know exactly what's happening. So they've got like a hologram imager that's showing like the vases that they found the black goo in the first one. They start referencing like, you know, Mr. Whalen died for this, and then they start playing the theme, and it was just a bit kind of, I don't know, it was a bit heavy-handed of, okay, now we're getting into territory where we're calling back to stuff, and it's feeling more fan servicey than like standing on its own two legs of like, no, this is this film, what we're doing is necessary for the plot of this film. Wasn't really a fan of that. Those are the only real things that I can think of for the time being. So some of the stuff that I think fans will be talking about, and again, I say this as an Alien fan, so this is just projections, if you will. I think, given the age of where we're at now with Reddit and Discord groups, there is a certain level where people are just angry for the sake of. I think people really can't see the forest for the trees on certain things, and if it's different or kind of doesn't vibe, it incites them to be angry about it rather than just being kind of like, meh, okay, whatever. So to digress, I think one of the things that people are going to be upset about is the age of the cast. It is very apparent, and I like this with Fetty, is like you pretty much know your cast of characters, I mean like 95% of them in like the first 10 minutes of the film, which is good because you get to know them, get invested with them. And it is very apparent that we're talking about like, they don't say their ages, but it's like I would guess that we're talking about a group of people from the ages of like maybe like 19 to like maybe your mid-20s, possibly. That's it. They're young. I think it works in the context of the story because, again, something else that I really like that I thought of is the film does a really good job of laying out the groundwork of how Weyland-Yutani are these evil corporate overlords. And the depths of where capitalism can go in basically driving people into these servile, subhuman type conditions, all in the name of basically profit. Now, that was something that obviously the other Alien films, they marked on. I mean, you knew that Weyland-Yutani was the bad guys. I mean, they were known as the corporation. But it wasn't really too overt. Like you kind of danced around it. You got a little bit more of it in kind of Alien 3 because you're like, oh yeah, here's a privatized prison where we're using them as for like making lead and stuff. This film opens up and it's like, oh, this is a hellhole. Like people that work for Weyland-Yutani are in a living hell. So to get back to my point, I thought it was good that the cast was young because there's this level of like they still have hope. Like they're sitting around and proverbially spinning like, yeah, this fucking sucks. Like we need to fix our situation like yesterday. And they're talking about like how, yeah, our parents were killed. Like they were grinding to dust and they died in like workplace accidents and stuff. And we're like, yeah, fuck that. We're getting out of Dodge. So it drives the plot of the film forward of effectively why things happen, for lack of a better way to put it. But it works best that the fact that these people are young and they still have hope and they're driven to do these things. And it doesn't play out like if anyone tells you that this feels like a like 80s slasher film or like a teen slasher film, they're fucking stupid. This doesn't carry that tone at all. This is not a Scream. This is not a Friday the 13th. Sleepaway Camp is nothing like that. Effectively, the age of the characters really doesn't matter too much once we get into our, I would say, our established location, other than you feel bad when bad things happen to them because they're effectively still like young adults. So I think that's something that the fan community might be divisive about is the age of the cast. I thought it worked fine. I actually thought, again, back to the intelligent writing, I thought it aided the script. It made a little bit more sense because also they do some really stupid, reckless things, which are like, yeah, I could see a 19 or 20-year-old doing that. 100% could believe that they would do that versus someone who's like a seasoned 50-year-old, like ex-officer or something. It's like, no. What's something else? I touched on it a little bit. I think a lot of the fan community is going to be divided in some ways about how Alvarez, again, embraced the mythology that was created in Prometheus and Covenant. I think a lot of people, and this is something that drives me crazy, I think a lot of people very naively and misguidedly, I would say, thought they were going to be going in and seeing like another Alien movie, like a verbatim copy of Ridley Scott's film. And it's like, one, I don't know why you want to do that. It doesn't take away from the film. It's like, I want to see something different. I'm glad that, again, Alvarez called back to the elements of Alien, and to some degree, James Cameron Aliens a bit, and I would even say to some measure, like especially in the beginning of the film, a lot of David Fincher's Alien 3. But I don't want to see the same movie again. Like, I don't want to see that. So the fact that Fede Alvarez, I think rightfully so, built on, again, the universe that's been established by 20th Century Fox with Prometheus and Covenant, I thought was good. Like, and that goes to the next point that I think people are going to be talking about, which is the climax of the film. I'll just say again, like, spoiler alert. You can turn off if you want. Okay, here we go. There's effectively a new monster. Huge callback to Prometheus and the fact that it's effectively a alien-human hybrid that's created. It's unnerving as shit. I thought it was a very effective movie monster. It felt oppressive. I thought it was a really good like climax monster. Again, harkening back to like the first Alien film when Ripley's on the Narcissus shuttle. I thought it worked. The design of it clearly takes inspiration from like the engineers from Prometheus, and I would even say, if we really want to go, definitely harkens to the hybrid that was in Alien Resurrection back in 1997, but it pulls it off better, and it works for the film too. So I think some of the fans are going to be on the fence about that. I thought it was again a monster that closed the movie out well, for lack of a better way to put it. I thought it was a pretty good culmination of what had been going on in the film. Once you get like on the space station, you kind of figure out what's going on. I'm happy again that it wasn't like a carbon copy of Alien, because I'm going through the whole film. I was like, we're going to have another situation where it's like, oh God, he's on board. We have to blow it out the airlock. And it was like, I was like, please, let's not do that. And they didn't. They shook it up a bit, twisted it up. There is still a final fight scene, if you will, but it wasn't what I expected fully. So, I mean, that's my shoot from the hip, off the cuff Alien Romulus review. I'm sure I'll have more to add once I've had a couple days to really think on it some. But again, I wanted to touch base with you all and let you know what my initial thoughts were. This went way longer than I thought. So if you're still watching, great, I appreciate it. But if you saw the film, if you had anything that you wanted to add about it, your own thoughts, like shoot a comment below and let's get a discussion going. But otherwise, go see the movie. It's a great film, great piece of filmmaking, great horror. I think you'll enjoy it.